Hello and welcome back to the Perspective series. This is a series of videos exploring the various perspectives of the Perspectives theory by C. George Bourret. And in this video, we're going to be exploring the rationalistic perspective. There's a couple videos before this one that give an overview of the 7 perspectives and also get into the first 2 perspectives. So this one is the 3rd perspective for us to get into. So I suggest if you haven't watched those videos, you might like to do so, just so you might have a better understanding of what I'm talking about here. So the rationalistic perspective is the 3rd perspective, as I said, that we are exploring. It comes right after the authoritarian. So here's what C. George Bourret has written on the rationalistic perspective. He says, the next 3 perspectives, rationalistic, mechanistic, and cybernetic, together constitute the objective views. And he puts the word objective in quotes. In contrast to the previous subjective ones, they share the idea that truth has an objective existence to be discovered outside of either personal or social realities. Developmentally and historically speaking, we see in these objective perspectives an acknowledgement that we may be mistaken as individuals and as societies. For this reason alone, it is not surprising that we only see these objective perspectives among the exceptional intellects and the well-traveled individuals of traditional societies, and that these perspectives only become more common in multicultural societies, especially the world-spanning cultures of the last few centuries. Even then, these perspectives are not available to everyone and may very well be defended against. It should also not be surprising that in modern societies it is still only the child in the second half of elementary school that begins to exhibit these objectivist qualities. So that's him speaking about the next 3 perspectives that we're going to get into, which he categorizes as the objectivist views. So more specifically about the rationalistic perspective, he says, the rationalistic perspective values reason, logic, technicalities, words, and if sufficiently sophisticated, mathematics. It is an idealistic perspective in that the objective truth it seeks is held to be contained by the mind. When someone brought up in an authoritarian tradition is exposed to other social realities beyond their own, they are most likely to begin by seeking commonalities among those social realities. Commonalities that inhere in the words and other symbolic approaches of the societies or cultures involved. These are by nature psychological or ideal. Developmentally, the late elementary school child and early adolescent are the best examples, with all their well-known tendencies to argue and toward idealism. So basically what C. George Bourret has explained here is that when we see the rationalistic perspective, what we have is someone who has basically just moved sort of a step beyond where the authoritarian is at. It's kind of where we left off in the last video when I was talking about how an authoritarian might be presented with, a different perspective or system of values or just interpretation of reality in general by another person, and they usually have one of 2 ways to respond, which is the first way would be to just reaffirm their own social reality, the little social sort of bubble that they currently adhere to, just reaffirm that and continue to dismiss or deny other perspectives or interpretations of reality. The other direction that an authoritarian can go would put us basically into the rationalistic perspective, which is for them to come to a place where they accept the validity of other people's perspectives, other groups of people's perspectives, other cultures, and their interpretations of reality. And then what they are compelled to do at that phase is seeking a sort of ultimate truth by trying to find the common theme across all of these different groups of people, all these different cultures, all these different perspectives. They would try and find the commonalities between them. They're trying to find that common thread between them. And then from that rationalistic perspective would then conclude that those common threads start to point to some sort of ultimate exteriorly based truth, right? So that's what I mean by exteriorly based, is that's part of the objectivist category. The assumption is that there is some ultimate truth outside of the self. And in this section where it talks about morality, and we explored the different ways that morality is constructed for the autistic, for the authoritarian, and so what he says here about the rationalistic perspective in regards to its understanding of morality, he says, the rationalistic perspective is one that focuses on universal principles. We can see more clearly here why the rationalistic fits best between the authoritarian and the mechanistic. The rationalistic view takes the absolutes of various authoritarian perspectives and sees the commonalities among them, ultimately to discover what presumably any rational person might agree to. There is often the idea, as Sorokin points out, that these ultimate principles come from God, while subordinate principles, accounting for all the varieties of moral systems, come from humans. So then, just to paraphrase what he's explaining about rationalistic morality, is that while they are still accepting that there's multiple ways to view things in general, they are still looking for an absolute truth that seems to come from an external source of power, God, or the universe, or whatever. It can be conceptualized in different ways. For all of the differences that they see across different groups and different individuals, they attribute that to the randomness of humans, not representing anything substantial. They only see those commonalities that they find to be the substantial or important information in regards to determining, ultimate truth, ultimate reality. Alright, so the next section, he explores mental illness and different types of neuroses or psychological pitfalls that each of these perspectives can fall into. So for the rationalistic perspective in regards to different mental illnesses, he says this: when we come to the objectivist views, we find that the person has already dealt with much of the complexity of the world, and is in fact more concerned with integrating what he or she has learned. The rationalistic, however, does still face some chaos and trauma which might lead him or her to fixate at this perspective with defensive thoughts and behaviors. Instead of retreating into rigid social structures like the authoritarian neurotic, however, the rationalistic neurotic retreats into rigid personal structures. Rationalistic disorders can range from full-blown obsessive-compulsive to anxiety neurosis to compulsive personality, but is best represented by the rather mild but enormously common personality type that we could all call the perfectionist. Among the qualities perfectionists tend to exhibit are a love of order in their own lives, including neatness and punctuality, and a tendency to foist that order onto others, sometimes to the point that they resemble authoritarian types. The difference is, though, that the order they demand is not so much society's order, but an order that they personally feel in themselves to be good. All of this stemming, of course, from their fear of the chaos that they see on the horizon. They may also appear rather narcissistic, especially to the degree that they consider themselves ideal specimens. But again, that narcissism isn't a true one, but rather a defensive reaction to their fears and anxieties. The giveaway that they are rationalistic rather than authoritarian or autistic is that they consider their rigid structures to be universal rather than social mores, while nevertheless being fully aware of the reality of other ways of being. They love logic and reason and tend to consider themselves supremely logical, whether it is among their talents or not, and consider the lack of logic to be a major flaw in others. I believe the best way to help the perfectionist is to reason with him or her by carefully introducing arguments that lead beyond the rationalistic approach, in such a way as to resolve the issues of chaos that frighten them. They may come to terms with their fears. So what Beret is pointing out here about some of the problems we encounter with rationalistic thinking generally seems like the person from this perspective is having difficulty reconciling the differences between all of the different cultures or social groups or individuals that they are considering as valid perspectives. And again, they would prefer to focus on the commonalities because they want to be able to hold on to some sense of knowing an absolute truth. Yet the openness to various perspectives in general can generate a sense of anxiety, it can generate a sense of chaos still. Rather than having, that one social bubble to cling to that say like an authoritarian would, they no longer have that, so they tend to then cling to more personally situated, immediately situated type of things like like you said, with obsessive compulsive disorders and stuff like that, obsessing over like procedures, obsessing over specific details or mannerisms or order and things like that. And then, finally he just sort of suggests that in order to help a rationalistic person, just like I said in the last video, you have to speak their language, so of course to a rationalistic, you would want to appeal to logic and reason to point out flaws in what they're doing, that like maybe it's not reasonable to expect everyone to adhere to rigid procedures of a certain type. Ultimately there's flexibility there as well. So that's gonna do it for this video. In the next one, we'll be exploring a little bit of the mechanistic perspective. And thanks for watching. Make sure to like the video if you like it and subscribe to my channel. And we'll see you in the next video. Bye guys.